This very first part is I'm going to try to focus on unlearning. And unlearning is also to transforming spaces. And it's also to transform formats and how we speak. So the first thing we did here was to close, to have a dark room for the videos, and also to have a more informal sofa to talk. This piece here is a very special piece for me because it reminds me of the academic settings and how you are invited to become a disembodied artist, a disembodied theorist, someone who presents itself without a body, but with a head and a neck, maybe with some shoulders, but disconnected from the rest of the body. When you speak behind this piece, you usually see the cognitive, the intellectual part of a person that is writing and producing knowledge far away and disconnected from its own body, from its own art, from its own biography. And I find it very important that we understand what unlearning means and how we are used to take some of these sculptures and elements as part of our learning to produce knowledge. So this was the first thing we wanted to do, to understand that we are here actually to position ourselves in our own discourse. And for that, we have to know in which time, in which place, and with which biography are we talking. There is no neutral discourse, no neutral room, no objective discourse or objective room. Everybody speaks from a specific place and time and space. And this is very much what we wanted to start with today, with unlearning. I chose then not to speak so much, but to show you more than to speak, because we have these incredible speakers, philosophers and thinkers today who are going to give you much theory and terminology that is very important. I thought then my task as an artist would be to bring you how do I translate this knowledge and this theory into visualization, into performance, and into art. I think that's, for me, that would be the most important task. I wanted to use today then some clips of Illusions. Yesterday we saw Illusions Volume 1, which was commissioned by the 32nd Biennale of São Paulo. And today I wanted to bring clips of the second Illusions Volume 2, which was dedicated to Oedipus and was commissioned by the 10th Berlin Biennale, curated by Gabi Noble, and Jochen did the first one. So I wanted to use the clips of the making to make you understand how I produce this work and how do I translate theory into the visualization and the artistic practices. And this work as a process of unlearning. And I understand this process of unlearning as an important moment, one of the important processes of decolonization. It has to do with dismantling, with deconstructing mechanisms, dominant mechanisms of production. I think it's maybe important just very quickly to say why it's so important to know what knowledge production is. We have to understand that knowledge, the dominant system of knowledge production is defined by what we call epistemology. Epistemology derives from the Greek episteme, which means knowledge, and logos, acquisition, the acquisition of knowledge. And it's actually defined by three moments. First is the themes. Second, the themes mean the themes and the questions. Second is the paradigms. That means how do you, from which perspective, do you look at something? And third, the methods. How do you explain that? So to say, the dominant system of knowledge production determines which questions merit to be questioned, how to analyze them, from which perspective, and how to explain them. So in this sense, knowledge production, the dominant system of knowledge production, defines not only what is the absolute truth, but also defines in whom to believe and in whom to trust. Knowing that where knowledge is produced, in the platforms and the institutions where Black people have been denied access historically since centuries, and other marginalized groups, we know that the system of what is knowledge is a property of whiteness, is a property of a colonial and patriarchal system. So only when marginalized people come to power positions to define also, to bring the things, to bring the questions, to bring the perspectives and the explanations, and by end, we can construct new reconfigurations of knowledge. That means when we transform the reconfigurations of power, that means who can speak and who can talk and who can ask questions and which questions and how to look at them, then we can also have new reconfigurations of what is knowledge. So having this very short introduction, it remains always for me this question of who knows what and who doesn't, and what is acknowledged as knowledge and what is not, and whose knowledge is this. And if I translate to this series of illusions, it's for me which stories are told, how stories are told, and why are they told, and who tell them. I wanted to start exactly with this first point. I have 5 short clips, and to bring one topic to each one of them. This very first one is, of course, the universal stories. Stories that are given to you as universal. Stories that represent the human cause and represent the human conflicts. For that, I use the Greek mythology. I, like all of us, grew up knowing all these mythologies, but remained a question for me: how would I read these stories if I could place race, gender, sexuality as an inclusive part of this storytelling? I read the stories, how do I reread and can retell these stories in the post-colonial moment? So this is very much what I did in this series. I wanted to start at looking at one Greek mythology after the other that I extensively studied during my studies as a girl. But I could not see myself in that universal human conflict. The conflicts and the political conflicts that were urgent for me were part of the metaphors of this mythology, but were not interpreted. So the intention then was to create a work, an artistic work, where I can translate these metaphors, these symbolisms, and visualize it into the post-colonial moment. I would like to show you the first clip. Is the clip number 5, Manuela? Just one moment. And we're going to see actually the Illusions Volume 2 dedicated to adipose. So yesterday we saw Narcissus, which was dedicated to the politics of misrepresentation and invisibility. And this is a translation from the mythology, from the idea of the universal, and to place it in the post-colonial moment. The Oedipus is a very violent story, like all the Greek mythology, and a very, very beautiful story that tells about a father who felt threat by a prophecy that you would have a child, and this child, this son once born, would kill his own father and would marry his own mother, the Queen Jocasta. Fearing and in competition with this child, he decides to kill the child, to wrap his ankles and to send the child away to the fields to be killed. This is how then I, after telling the story, translate to understand the politics of genocide and the politics of violence. So we're going to see the first clip where King Elias, the father, he is preparing his son to be sent to death because he should not compete with his power position. So this would bring me to the second point, to create a white cube. How do I visualize the stories? It was very important for me to work in a studio that had no borders, that had round walls, so that when you're shooting, you have the illusion of having a white infinity, that the room never ends. That on the other end would create to the audience an idea of a sense of timelessness, exactly to play with this past, present, and future in the same space. Then was for me very important to think how to occupy this white space. I had an ensemble of actors that I've been working with since many years. They are absolutely wonderful, extraordinary. They are all Afro-German actors from the theater, working in the theater since many years. And I had a chance always to work with them. And it was very important then to use very minimal dressing, in black, to have a very minimalist choreography so that these bodies move in this white space. And I think this first contrast between this white infinity and this idea that we are telling a universal myth, and then to have these black bodies occupying this space, is a very new constellation for most of us, that really raises the question, but what is universal? And who is considered to be part of the universal? So it brings us also questions to what I will talk later about. What is the representation that we have of the human condition? And the danger to create a sense of humanity that is universal, but actually is erasing most of the population of the world, most of the genders, most of the sexualities and the races. So having this, you saw that this moment was a moment of silence, because I produced the entire film in silence, and I come and enter as a voice, as a storyteller. I wanted to use the storytelling and to have a reference with the whole African tradition of oral storytelling as a form of knowledge production. As you know, in the West Central Africa, the griot had a very important role. Many times were matriarch, were women telling stories, and they had exactly this role of analyzing reality. They were an archive of songs, of music, of happenings, of events, and they would bring them to and tell the story, and then they gradually would turn the metaphors upside down and were able to have a critical discourse and surprise the audience with something that they thought to know but not to know. And this is very much what I wanted to create in these illusions, to work with universal stories that we know what Narcissus is and who Echo was. But suddenly we realized there's other dimensions in these stories that I was not aware of. So here I would like to show the clip number 2, Manuela. We're going to look again, it's in silence. You can play and I just speak a little bit. It's in silence, it's again, I'm telling a story, and this is the moment when this Oedipus arrives in Thebes and encounters the Sphinx. The Sphinx is a very, very important character, because she's described, the Sphinx is sent from Ethiopia into the Greek mythology, and she is described as a animal somehow. She has the face of a woman, she has this hybrid sexuality and body with wings like a bird and the body of a lion. And she was sent by a goddess, the goddess Hera, because something very terrible had happened in Thebes. And she's there to ask the people if they know the truth. So this links us a little bit with the work of yesterday with Narcissus. What do we know? And what we do not know, and why, and who has the privilege not to know. Those who do not know why Thebes, who cannot answer a riddle, will be eaten by her. And Oedipus is the first who's able to answer. So he's the messenger saying, we cannot escape our own history. I have to understand what my history is, and I have to take responsibility for this history and to negotiate from there. Then I would go to a third moment of the white cube with clip number 1. It was very important for me to occupy the white cube with a retelling of history, new knowledge production, and visuality. The actors work very minimalist so that the audience is not distracted with a lot, but focus on the storytelling, on the voice, on the narrative, who is speaking, and to listen. That was very important for me, to create this momentum with the audience of listening to someone that they usually never listen to. It's a very intimate, in an installation, a very intimate moment of listening and speaking and listening. And the music also played a very important role. In all the illusions, I worked with the opera composer, South African opera composer, Neil Muyanga, who was a very dear friend. and is absolutely brilliant. And we worked in a way that I had one music for each piece, and then I deconstructed the music in several momentos, and we used always the very same music, but dismantled in several elements for different parts of the work. I wanted to use the music also as a narrative. That was part of the work we presented first at Bienal São Paulo, where video installation only had music and the writing were the visuals. So I wanted to bring this music as a narrative, also to remember that for many people around the world during colonization, the music was the only form of narrative. People of the African diaspora could occupy spaces only through music. We were denied access to certain spaces. We could not enter spaces physically, but we could occupy spaces through music. That's why you go to Cuba or to Brazil or to Nigeria or South Africa or Angola, and music plays such an important role, because it was, if physically, only through music we could be present, and if not physically present, the music is something metaphysical. You cannot grasp music. The music flies through the walls, and if somebody is outside playing music, even if you forbid these people to enter, you have to listen to the music, because the music flies through the space. It has no time and space. It flies until you cannot hear it anymore and enters the space. So music was a form of occupying space. So it always comes, or me as a storyteller with a voice, or Neo Muyanga in his composition and with the piano, singing or playing. So we can see this very beautiful one when Oedipus could solve the riddle of the Sphinx, and the city was free, and come the violence, no? That if someone could answer and free the city, the end of Jocasta, of Queen Jocasta, could be given to the person who freed the city. So Queen Jocasta was given the end to Oedipus, his own son, without knowing. So they meet, and they are happy with the liberations and celebrating. It's number 1, Manuela. So this is the part with the music. We had a lot of fun, as you can see, doing this work. It was really a big joy to work with the actors. And I always design a storyboard, and I improvise a lot in the setting and while working with the actors. So by this time we didn't have the music yet when they were playing, so we were playing other music and they were just dancing and dancing. And then after I received the second part of the music of Neo, then I edited the film according to the music. But we had so much fun always working together. So I still have 5 minutes? Then I just go to the last, I just say one sentence to bring together all these that I wanted to say. I wanted to make a trajectory, actually, to go into the point of the human condition that I spoke before, and to remind us that I think in art we also produce knowledge by also producing questions. I don't think it's necessarily about producing knowledge through giving answers, but to create works that when people leave the installations of the work, they have questions that have not been there before. And this is for me also a way of producing knowledge, to bring questions. And remembering that you are also creating a new configuration of narrative, but also you are also creating a space where you are telling who can tell stories and which stories can be told and with which layers can these stories be told. And you are also recreating a sense of what is the human condition. I think one of the most problematic of these all platforms is they narrate stories that exclude most of us from the condition of the humanity. And they give us an idea of who is normal and who can represent this normality. So for me, one of the important roles of creating work is to dismantle that and to retell stories and to give and to create another sense of who we are, or we are many. So saying that, I just leave, can we see the clip number 3, Manuela, which is exactly, this is the chorus, where the chorus is responding to the story again and again. And in this very moment, they are talking about the violence of being placed outside humanity. They're saying something like, it is not that I'm not expecting this violence, but that this violence is not expected, but the violence is there because it placed me outside humanity. And then I would go to the very last clip, which actually I wanted to end by saying, there's nothing for me more urgent than liberating ourselves from this very dominant knowledge production system and to create another sense of humanity. And inside of that, it has a lot to do with this trilogy for me, which is speaking, listening, or silencing, and that we have to decide in between these three. And it's very important for me in the work to create an installation where the audience is invited to come and where they learn to listen for 30 minutes or for 40 minutes, to listen to a narrative that might have not been there before, instead of silencing. So this is the liberating part of doing art. So I leave you with the last one, and I say thank you very much. Manuela, could you play number 4? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.